Washington to Moscow, New York to Paris, Rome to Jerusalem, the prophecies of the Bible are being fulfilled. Stand by for J.R. Church and today's Prophecy in the News.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to continue what we had on last week's program when we talked about the impending fall of Egypt. And primarily, we were looking at Ezekiel chapters 29 through 32. I'm convinced that the next prophetic fulfillment will be the fall of Egypt, and it looks like it could come within the next few weeks or months. Just before the fall of Egypt, in chapter 29 through 32 of Ezekiel, Ezekiel has a prophecy against Lebanon. It is found in chapters 28, and in this chapter we have the fascinating rebuke of the prince of Tyre, and we get down to verse 20, a prophecy against Zidon. So we have Tyre and Zidon, the two main Lebanese cities. And we have only to look back at the decade of the 1980s, the 1982-83 war in Lebanon and the years following for what I would have to say the judgment of God against Tyre and Sidon. And now we are approaching and awaiting the prophecy against Egypt to be fulfilled. And Gary Stimmer is here to discuss with me the work of the Hamas and the plans they have for the fall of Egypt, at least in Egypt as we know it today.
Well, J.R., I couldn't help, as you were talking about Tyre and Zidon, as it's mentioned in the King James Bible, you know, Tyre and Sidon were in the news. Very big in the news, and still are on occasion. And there's a lot of guerrilla activity. The PLO was very big there. But the PLO has been displaced by a far more sinister organization in our day. And it's called Hamas, spelled H-A-M-A-S. Essentially, Hamas is a terrorist group sponsored by the Iranian clerics. And these Iranian clerics are nothing more, in my opinion, than dictators who have a political agenda, namely to be the most powerful force in the Middle East. And they're very practical in securing power. They work underground for years and years and years until they secure a foothold, and then they begin to move. And as we mentioned on the last week's program, they have begun to move into Egypt because Egypt is considered the kingpin to Mideast peace. If Egypt falls, Israel will fall, since Egypt has been the support for Israel ever since the 1978 Carter-Sadat peace agreement. Now, Hamas is operating in the Sudan, it's operating in Egypt, it's operating southward towards Somalia and Ethiopia. It's operating in what's left of Lebanon. Lebanon is pretty much a wasteland these days. It's operating in Syria, it's operating in Jordan, by the way, with the blessing, I guess you could say, of King Hussein. At least he hasn't kicked them out of his country. Hamas, and they're most famous, I suppose, because 400 of them were deported from Israel into South Lebanon. They were trucked up across the border and dumped out, and they've been camping there ever since. And the world media have given these men publicity, sort of favorable publicity ever since, posing Israel as the bad guy and these poor deported 400 as put upon martyrs. Well, here's the way Hamas operates. In the last 5 years, it has assassinated 700 Palestinians. Now, do you hear that in the daily news? You don't.
That's incredible.
We're not talking about Israelis here. We're talking about Palestinians. And these Palestinians were assassinated by their own people, the Hamas organization, for failing to go along with the party line. We have a quote here from the Near East report of January 25th, 1993. Here's the way Hamas works. Quote, they've butchered alcoholics and drug abusers. They've slaughtered women who dress in slacks. Why? They don't approve of women in slacks. According to an Israeli by the name of Be'er, who is rather highly placed in the Israeli foreign ministry, They interrogate what he calls suspects. If they don't get the proper answers, they torture them. If they still don't get the proper answers, they kill them. If they do get the proper answers, they kill them anyway. They are known for brutality. And he says nearly anyone could be killed. It could be a teacher they disagree with, or a journalist who writes articles against them. It could be a Marxist, an atheist, a Darwinist, a Freudian, a member of the Rotary or Lions clubs. Both are held to be Jewish spy organizations according to Hamas' 1988 covenant. Someone who supports pluralism could be assassinated. Someone who supports coexistence with Israel might be assassinated. Someone who supports the Madrid Peace Conference could be assassinated. As I say, they've assassinated over 700 of their own people in the last 5 years, and finally, they kill cruelly. Yitzhar Ba'er, as I say, who is rather highly placed in the Israeli Foreign Ministry, says when Hamas kills, it kills with great cruelty. And he says, I won't go into the details, take my word, they specialize in cruelty. And that's a quote. As to the way Hamas operates, here's the bitter truth. They are a state-supported terrorist organization with tentacles that reach from Berlin all the way down to Ethiopia and Somalia. They are known for absolute cruelty. They are known for underhanded operations which include bribery of state officials. And if that won't work, open outright assassinations. And JR, the Russians have recently put their stamp and seal of approval on the Hamas organization. Bottom line.
That's incredible. From the Jerusalem Post International edition of March 13th, 1993, there's an article about a United Nations official ignoring the murder of a Jewish man in the Gaza Strip area. Saw it, witnessed it, and turned and looked the other way as the Jew was killed, shot in the head. In fact, it says after this Jewish man by the name of Wiesbrod entered Rafah, hundreds of residents blocked his exit and stoned him. He was hit in the head by a rock and lost control of his car, which smashed into a pole near a mosque. There he waited helplessly as two gunmen walked over and shot him in the head, chest, and stomach, the Palestinian observer said. And this was all witnessed by a United Nations envoy. And they did nothing about it. They have said nothing about it.
That's right.
And yet these 400 members of the Hamas terrorist organization, which were deported by Israel, receives the
acclamation.
The acclamations and the pity and the empathy of the United Nations. It's really an incredible thing. We have moved into a world so gone awry that it is absolutely incredible, isn't it?
And seems to be growing more so every day with great rapidity. As we begin to put pieces together, and JR mentioned, as you talk about Ezekiel, you're talking about a sequential fall of nations, starting with Lebanon, moving to Egypt in Ezekiel 29.
Yes, and we are now awaiting that for, I think it'll happen in the near future.
It looks as though it will. But in the last week of March, Foreign Minister Kozyrev of Russia visited President Rafsanjani in Tehran. For about a week, they had talks. And they finally hammered out a 25-year mutual defense agreement, a mutual defense pact, stating in effect that if either of our nations is attacked by a Western force, the other will come to its aid. In signing this pact, Kozyrev tacitly acknowledged Hamas, the organization Hamas, which is a state-organized terrorist group supported by Iran. And Kozyrev and all of his cronies back in Moscow are saying, in effect, to Iran, you can go ahead and do what you will in the Middle East. Do what you will in Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, even Libya perhaps. Go ahead and work out your methodology for becoming a power in the Mideast, and we will not interfere. You do whatever you want to. Now, JR, Russia could not have signed that pact if Russia were a sweet, well-intentioned nation.
Yes. And you know, of course, our president has now offered help and support financially to Russia, the former Soviet Union. And yet they continue to build their Typhoon-class submarines. They continue to sell their military supplies and equipment to people like Iran.
That's
Iran,
right.
for example, has recently obtained 4 submarines.
That's right.
Of the Kilo-class, 239-foot diesels.
That's right.
And 4 nuclear warheads, at least. These are reported buys from Russia. And now Russia has this 25-year mutual defense treaty. If Russia was so broke, what are they doing making another 25 years is a long ways down the road to look.
Yes, indeed.
So they must have some plans. They must know where they're going and what they're doing. And it looks like our president at the same time is dismantling the military of the United States. In effect, he is cutting back drastically so that we will be unable to defend ourselves against what we might call a sleeping giant, or maybe we should say the giant's playing possum.
Which brings us to a very interesting subject, and we're going to be in the next few minutes moving toward the subject of Russia in latter-day prophecy, which has been a favorite topic of prophetic expositors. But we're moving through the book of Ezekiel. And J.R., I wanted you to comment for a moment on Ezekiel 33, because Ezekiel says in the 33rd chapter, verse 22, "Now the hand of the Lord was upon me in the evening, for he that was escaped came, and had opened my mouth until he came to me in the morning, and my mouth was opened, and I was no more dumb." Ezekiel's mouth had been sealed shut.
For 7 years.
Yeah.
For 7 years, Ezekiel could not speak. God had caused his roof to cleave, or his tongue to cleave to the roof of his mouth. Over in chapter 3, Ezekiel is told to be a watchman and to warn the people, or to tell the people why God has judged them. He went to Tel Aviv, sat down, and refused to speak. And because of that, God said, "Now, I've told you to be a watchman, and you haven't spoken. I'll require their blood at your hand." And he then caused Ezekiel's tongue to cleave to the roof of his mouth, and Ezekiel then was unable to speak for the next 7 years. In chapter 33, once we have the fall of Lebanon and the fall of Egypt, we have his voice coming back. And to me, Gary, this is a message of the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel has been a closed book.
Yes.
For the past 2,500 years. Now, with the fall of Egypt and what we have seen in Lebanon in the last decade, the book of Ezekiel is about to become an open book.
Yes.
And Ezekiel has a special message for the people. And as his voice is opened, his first message is against the Palestinians.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah, he speaks to those who inhabit the land, that say, Abraham was one and he inherited the land, but we are many and the land is given to us for an inheritance. So this is, to me, a message of the Palestinians. At the same time, God tells Ezekiel that there are prophecies in the Psalms, and when those Psalms come to pass, he says, "Lo, it will come, then shall they know that there has been a prophet hath been among them." The previous verse says, "Thou art unto them as a very lovely song, hath a pleasant voice, but the people will not understand." But when those prophecies in the Psalms come to pass, then people will begin to understand that there's a prophecy there that is being fulfilled. And he goes on to say, in fact, his very next message, Ezekiel's very next message is against the sinful shepherds of Israel, of whom Ezekiel has been one of them.
That's right.
Who've refused to speak out. Their tongues have been closed, their mouth has been closed, they have not sought after the helping their people. They have fed themselves but have not fed the flock of Israel. And you know, for the past 2,000, maybe 2,500 years, we have seen Israel facing one dilemma after another, and there has been no prophecy for them. There has been no hope for them. They have been persecuted in every land under the sun. And I think they will soon recognize this.
But God is about to move, because as we move toward Ezekiel 38, we come now to Ezekiel chapter 36, where Ezekiel continues to prophesy, and we have in verse 2, "Thus saith the Lord God, because the enemy hath said against you, Aha, Even the ancient high places are ours in possession. Therefore, prophesy and say, thus saith the Lord God. And here begins a long prophecy about where God promises that those people who are standing up and claiming the land are not going to get it.
Yeah, and you know, Gary, this has to be a prophecy against the Palestinians, because they are the ones who are in control of the Temple Mount today. These high places you're talking about here, they say the Temple Mount is ours, Jerusalem is ours, the West Bank area is ours. God has a different message for them, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, and even the Golan Heights are ours. But you know, JR, it always astonishes me that if you go to Israel today and you want to see the Temple Mount, you have to buy a ticket from one of the Jerusalem muftis. That is, you have to buy a ticket from an Islamic organization to visit the Temple Mount. And here is a prophecy that is as current as today, where the Islamics are saying, even the ancient high places are ours.
Yeah, and when Ezekiel got his voice back, then the Lord came to me and said, Ezekiel, hop in my Merkabah, I want to take you on a little trip. And God takes him over to Jerusalem. For remember, a man has just come to him and said, Jerusalem is destroyed and the people have been slaughtered. And now Ezekiel, this is 2,500 years ago, Ezekiel goes to Jerusalem. He sees the ruined temple and the decimated Temple Mount. He sees the bodies, or actually the bones, of all this left, because it's been 6 months since Jerusalem was burned by the Babylonians. He sees the bones of the Jews, of the Israelites, scattered all over the hills and the valleys and across the Kedron Valley and around up through the Tyropian Valley. All around Jerusalem in the Gehenna Valley, he sees the bones, the remains of the Jews, and God says, Ezekiel, can these bones live? And Ezekiel by this time is no longer proud. He's no longer puffed up and mad at God. He says, Lord, whatever you say. And God says, prophesy to these bones. Now, he was talking about the bones, I think, 2,500 years ago, and yet his prophecy was of the future, because Ezekiel's mouth has now been opened, and Ezekiel has a message for modern Jews today. And the message is, Israel will live again. And we have seen that come to pass in this century. And in 1948, breath was blown back into that body of Jews, and Israel became a nation among the nations of the world. That's in chapter 37, and now we approach this incredible Russian invasion of Israel. Now remember, the prophecy against Lebanon and the fall of Egypt are the catalyst upon which events begin to really transpire now. And we're going to see, I think, 144,000 Jews sealed of God. I say we're going to see. History will see it.
I would think we would be gone by that time.
We're gone by then. And this Battle of Gog and Magog is now impending and comes to pass. And it's fascinating, Gary, that in verse 5, Persia is the first nation listed with Russia in her invasion against Israel. And this brings us right back to that 25-year mutual defense treaty, doesn't it?
It really does, because Persia is none other than modern Iran. In fact, the modern language of Iran is called Farsi, which is the ancient name of the country, Persia. In other words, they speak Persian. And Persian, anybody that speaks Persians, in my estimation, is a Persian. And it says right here in the King James Bible, in verse 5, the allies of Gog will be Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, with them. That is, with Gog. They are allied with Gog. Now, there can be no doubt that Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, is Russia. And we've talked about this at great length in the past. There's no reason to defend this point. It's simply etymologically, historically, the case that this is Russia. We have seen, JR, within the last month, a 25-year pact signed between Russia, not the Soviet Union, Russia, or as it's called, I believe here in the text, Rosh, because some translations say Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. We've seen that pact signed between Russia and Persia. And that sets up Ezekiel 38:5 perfectly.
And it's interesting that Ethiopia is listed here as well, because over the past decade we have seen the Ethiopians struggle, we have seen them suffer, we have seen them in dire hunger, And in 1991, we saw the fall of the Ethiopian government, the communist government of Ethiopia. Bring us up to date, Gary. Is that government completely out of power? Do the Russians still have a stranglehold on Ethiopia?
They have a stranglehold on about half of Ethiopia. The dictator, supported by the Soviet state, was Haile Mengistu Mariam. He was a thief. He was a murderer. He was every kind of evil man you can call evil.
He killed Haile Selassie by his own hands.
That's right.
Smothered him with a pillow. And then buried him under the floor of his own bedroom.
That's right.
Isn't it?
Well, he was deposed, and everybody has thought since then, since Mariam has been deposed, the communist government is gone. Not so, because Hamas, operating out of Sudan, operating through Somalia, in conjunction with the Soviet Union, still plagues about half of Ethiopia. And JR, the way it's going, we won't be able to stop them. They're already in place there. And so we see Ethiopia and Libya allying with Russia. We're talking about Northeast Africa, basically, Ethiopia and Libya, minus Egypt, because Egypt has already been destroyed back in Ezekiel chapter 29. Sometime prior to this, Egypt has been made desolate for a 40-year period.
And that's what we are now awaiting, the soon future destruction of Egypt, which will click off then a series of events that will cause Israel to be immediately at war with her Islamic neighbors, and it will result in the destruction of Damascus, I think, as well. And when we see Damascus destroyed, then Russia, Persia, Libya, and Ethiopia will move against Israel with their allies. This, I think, is upcoming, and we don't know when exactly, but there are those in Israel who have predicted the Battle of Gog and Magog for 1994.
Let's deal briefly with the question when. In verse 16 of Ezekiel 38, "Thou shalt come up against my people Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days, and I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes." JR, these latter days, I believe that as we've looked at prophecy, that virtually always that term is tied very closely to the tribulation period itself. And so we have a tie here between the events of Ezekiel 38 and the advance of the tribulation period.
It is my feeling, Gary, that the rapture of the church will occur under the cover of the Battle of Gog and Magog. So I think we'll be here to see the events of Egypt destroyed, and possibly the battle against Damascus, and possibly then the manipulations, the movements which will bring Russia down against Israel. We will see all of that, but when the battle begins and Russia makes her invasion with Persia and the Hamas organization, etc., we're out of here. We'll be gone, taken, I think, under the cover of that war. And that war could be a worldwide nuclear exchange. And our own government is presently preparing for destruction, it would appear to me. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is America's foremost prophetic monthly, Prophecy in the News. You can get a free introductory subscription to Prophecy in the News just by calling this number, 1-800-475-1111. Each month, J.R. Church and the research team give you the news from a prophetic perspective. At least 2 full-length prophetic studies are included in every issue, plus commentaries on important subjects: education, politics, economics, science. Keep up with the events in Europe and the Middle East by ordering your free introductory subscription to Prophecy in the News right now. Just pick up your phone and dial this toll-free number, 1-800-475-1111. Operators are standing by right now to take your call. If the phone is busy, keep trying. You'll get through, and you'll be glad you did. The newspaper is free, the call is free, so what are you waiting for? Here's that toll-free number again, 1-800-475-1111. Ask for the free introductory subscription to Prophecy in the News.
I hope you will get our newspaper. It's free for the next 6 months, just for the asking. We have 2 sets of cassette tapes that give the entire story of all 48 chapters in Ezekiel. 48 studies on the subject. on 12 cassette tapes in 2 volumes, the Ezekiel Report Volume 1 and the Ezekiel Report Volume 2. These are available for a gift of $35 to the Ministry of Prophecy in the News. I think it's important for you to get these, to find out what Ezekiel has to say, because remember, Ezekiel's voice has been returned. It is as soon as Egypt is destroyed, Ezekiel's message is going to move right to front and center stage. Gary, when's this going to take place?
Oh, yes, J.R. I'll tell you what, a lot of people have asked, well, how do you know that all this sets off the tribulation? In Ezekiel 38:18, there's a very interesting verse, and it shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord God, that my fury shall come up in my face. Right there in black and white, God is saying the timing will be as follows. When Gog invades, God's fury will come. That fury can be none other than the Great Tribulation. And this locks it firmly in a timeline. J.R., you know, the Ezekiel Report, I believe it's probably the most exciting tape set that I've participated in since I've been here at Prophecy in the News. Really? It really gets exciting when we go through Ezekiel.
48 studies, almost a half-hour long each, and they are in 2 volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2, for a gift of $35 to the Ministry of Prophecy in the News. You can call us if you have Visa or MasterCard and you'd like to order these over the telephone. Our toll-free number is 1-800-475-1111. Call today, will you, and ask for the Ezekiel Report and put your $35 gift to this ministry on your Visa or MasterCard. Gary, you know, in chapter 39 of Ezekiel, in verse 9, the Jews will spend 7 years just cleaning up from the Battle of Gog and Magog, just burning the weapons. To me, that says it's the 7-year tribulation period has set in.
Absolutely.
God's fury has come up in his face, hasn't it?
It certainly has.
If you'd like to just simply write us here at Prophecy in the News and order the Ezekiel Report in Volumes 1 and 2, 12 tapes, 12 cassette tapes with 48 studies, almost a half-hour each. Write us here and send a gift of $35 or more and ask for the Ezekiel Report. Here's the address: Prophecy in the News, Post Office Box 7000, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma 73153. That's P.O. Box 7000 and the zip code 73153. I hope you'll get these tapes on the Ezekiel Report and find out just what's coming about, and soon. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.